Are you looking for adventure? Do you want to find peace? Long-distance trails offer you freedom and discovery. They offer a way to connect to yourself and to the world around you at the same time. The most popular trails have become crowded, but there are so many other trails that have plenty of space. The Trails Around the World podcast is here to introduce you to new trails and to new types of trails and to expand your horizons. Join me as we explore, finding out what is possible and how to do it. Stephen Ladd, welcome to the Trails Around the World podcast. You are somewhat of a celebrity in the world of small boat voyaging, but I'll let you introduce yourself. Can you tell us a bit about your background and your adventure resume, as I like to say?
Do you mind if I hi, but do you mind if I first introduce my wife? Because she actually wants to be able to go out to dinner without
Please
me.
go ahead.
Okay. Jenny?
Hi.
Hi,
This is
Jenny.
Jenny.
Hi.
Pleased to meet you. Jenny, how did you find yourself involved in this voyage that we're about to talk about?
We met at work and we started going on little trips together. And then we decided we should go down to Mexico in a truck and take a canoe. And it just kind of evolved into this bigger and bigger and bigger thing that just kept getting better. So I went along with it.
Sounds good. Did you have any background with boating at that time?
No, actually, I had almost none, just a little bit as a child on a motorboat.
And you're from the Pacific Northwest, like Stephen?
Yes, I am.
Jenny, how do you feel about the trip in retrospect?
It's kind of hard for me to look back on the trip because I never really wanted it to end, I guess. And so it's like remembering, it's kind of bittersweet. It was great. I could have lived like that forever probably. But, things don't always work out that way. That's kind of difficult lifestyle to maintain, I think.
I'd say that's a pretty loud endorsement for the experience. Most people would consider you to be in a different life phase now because you're raising two small kids. But do you see yourself doing another voyage like this?
Probably not when they're this small. I would definitely be open to something. I'm not particularly, I'm not that into sailing anymore. I think I really went through that pretty heavily and I came out the other side and I don't really want to do that again. So I don't know so much about boating unless it was like being on the rivers in the Amazon. That was just ideal. Like I would do that, but I wouldn't want to be out in the oceans again. I wouldn't mind just getting a van and just driving all over South America and seeing all the inland places that we couldn't see while we were on a boat or other places, really anywhere.
Sounds great. Thanks a lot.
Mm-hmm.
And a personal aside, when my kids were small, my dream that would be realistic and compatible with the kids being small was canal boats in Europe, where it's
Yeah, we've
all,
talked about that a bit.
yeah, it's all contained. I mean, you go for a week or two and you don't need to get a hotel and everything's on the boat and there's no license involved. So you can let the kid steer the boat, which is like a 65-foot barge going down the canal. You can stop at a town and have lunch. Anyway, it sounded pretty ideal to me, and it ends up costing about the same as the hotels would have cost anyway. So it's
Yeah, when we were traveling on the rivers in Brazil and stuff, it's very common for families to be on their little boat. They're going from village to the city and they might be on their boat for days and days, or who knows all the places they go, but you just see a little boat and there's kids and there's hammocks. And it just seemed like a really ideal lifestyle. If you have a family, you can do it because the rivers are calm and it's almost like a whole little society. You stop in some town and the other people, they're not from that town, but they're families and they got kids. And if you had kids, they'd probably play together. I think it could work out pretty well.
yeah, absolutely.
Just in case the wrong picture might come into mind, these are not modern boats. These are a certain style of wooden boat from that area, and these people are poor people. They're uh, they're kind of a class of people that live along the river. They're It's not like modern American boaters or anything like that,
No,
fiberglass boats.
I think that's a very worthwhile observation to make. I know that there are groups in Myanmar and in the Indian Ocean. There are a couple of ethnic groups that were really just completely living on boats, and I think they were, at least one of the groups was completely wiped out by the there was a tsunami there. Remember, about 10, 15 years ago, and I know that it did enormous damage. But yeah, these sort of ethnic groups that their survival strategy is focused on the boats. And it's a very interesting thing. And so you're saying that there are groups on the rivers down in South America that are similar to that.
Yeah, I don't know if many of them are full time always on the boat. My guess is that they mostly had homes, but they had to go places and do things for long, and the distances are so great that they could be weeks anyway with the family on the boat before they ever get back home again. That's the impression I got more.
Right. All right. Let's back up. And Steve, let's have you introduce yourself. Thank you very much, Jenny.
Well, I'm from Bremerton, Washington, which we are still living in. My parents were big adventurers in the sense of camping, fishing, hiking, skiing, and so us, their kids, are too. And I've always been interested in any kind of adventure or exploration, and I've been on I go on a lot of small things, but I've been on 3 large things over a year in duration.
I know of two. Which three large things of long duration are you talking about?
Well, the first one, when I graduated from high school, I traveled for a little over a year in Europe, Asia, and Africa. So I was only 18. I was traveling across Europe to Turkey, then Turkey, Iran, Afghanistan, Pakistan, and got turned around at the Indian border because of the 1971 war between Pakistan and India. So I went west towards Europe again. And when I got to Europe, I got a motorcycle and went to Africa, but only to Morocco because 2 motorcycle accidents ruined that trip, and I ended up in prison in Morocco. And but that was for 1 month in the prison, and that was at the tender age of 18, 19 that I had those adventures. Then the next big adventure was when I was 36, and it was 3 years in a 12-foot boat. That's the name of the book, and that's what it was. I designed and built my own boat, and the reason it ended up being 12 feet long was that at 12 feet, it's light enough for me to drag it up the beach by myself. I wanted to be amphibious, the ability to just get out of the water, pull it up on the beach, and that's the normal way to sleep. Although many times you anchor instead or tie up to a dock, but you can always pull it out of the water. And so it's really light and therefore not real ideal for being in the ocean all the time, but allows you to easily transport it by dragging it or putting it on the back of a pickup truck. So it's a lot of versatility. That's the second one. And then the third one was the new book that's out now, the 5-year voyage, just to distinguish it from 3 years in a 12-foot boat. This one is a longer voyage. And we went further, and it included my wife, Jenny, a somewhat larger boat, but still pretty small and light, a 21-footer.
Right. Now, your first book was called 3 Years in a 12-Foot Boat, right?
Right.
That refers to that voyage you took. And that voyage was in the early 90s?
It was 90 and 93.
And then the 5-year voyage is which time period?
2009 to 2014.
Okay. And George was born in 2013?
Yes. Yes. And it's his birthday today. He's 9 now.
Happy birthday to George.
Yeah.
And your second book is about to come out April 5th, I believe, right?
Right.
And what's the title of that book?
The 5-year voyage, subtitle Exploring Latin American Coasts and Rivers.
So I think our interview today will mostly focus on the most recent 5-year voyage. Now, you mentioned that your parents went camping and hiking and that sort of thing. How did you find yourself getting into boats, and what makes you love small boats as
Mm.
opposed to other ways of traveling?
Yeah, my parents didn't have a boat, but we sometimes went with other families that did have boats. So I was around them somewhat, but not indoctrinated into them. And then in my teens or 20s, probably my upper teens, I just decided a small boat would be a good thing. And so I just got into small sailboats and canoes and so forth as an adjunct. I've done a lot of cross country, like backpacking, wilderness skiing, mountain climbing, bicycling, other kinds of recreation and sports. But the two books I've written are about boating adventures.
Mm-hmm. What would you say is special about traveling by a small boat?
Well, the way I like to travel by small boat is similar to hiking in that, for example, I carry my same stove that I use when I'm hiking is what I use when I go in my boat. And a lot of the gear is the same, but you're able to carry more gear. You add on a broader range of tools. You add on repair materials like some epoxy and some fiberglass. You add on equipment that's necessary for the handling of the boat, and you can have a little bit more clothing. You can have a little bit more. You can carry enough food for say 2 weeks, and so you're enough water. So it's obviously an expansion, but it's minimalistic, and you're able to carry that stuff. Oh, the other thing that's different about a boat, of course, very different, is that you're on the water. But what's interesting about being on the water is the fact that you can come up to land wherever you want. It's the water itself, the middle of the ocean or the middle of the lake is not the destination for me, but you're able to come close to shore at least wherever you want. And there's coastlines, islands, and rivers and lakes. So you're you're on land a lot on these voyages. You're getting around from place to place. You're coming to ports, and you get to know those places. Both trips involved They both involved going down to South America and the Caribbean and Central America, going along the way. So in both cases, I chose to go south towards warmer weather,
Mm-hmm.
and then in the latter case, actually went far enough south to where it was getting colder again, and then turned around and came back. But you're able to pick your weather.
Right. I'm hearing you talk about the boat as a vehicle, and I mean that in sort of the strict definition of the word. Many people identify sort of in their hearts as a sailor, and so the activity is something that is part of their identity. Do you think of yourself as a sailor or a boater, or is it seems to me like maybe it's more of a traveler? Where would you put yourself?
Boating's only one of my interests. It's one of my biggest ones. And when I am boating, I might be sailing, rowing, or motoring. So I'm not really identifying as a sailor, but I certainly have done a lot of sailing.
How did you start sailing?
Well, I started sailing when my uncle had a little 14-foot Hobie, and I just took it out by myself and tipped over and got back up again. And then I found a 12-foot boat, a sailboat that was kind of half built, and figured out how to fix it and sail it. Then I made my own boat. So all just self-taught small boats. I've never had an almost never even sailed a conventional boat. That is a Marconi rig, sloop, mainsail, and jib boat. I've never had that kind of a boat. My boats have all been, well, I've only had about four, I suppose, but they've all been lighter and simpler rigs, where there's no standing rigging. They're self-supporting masts,
Right.
and a different kind of rig than most people are familiar with, a much simpler, minimalistic rig.
What kind of rig did Squeak have?
Squeak had no, it had two masts. They were both windsurfer masts, so just a hollow tube of fiberglass that you can easily just pull out of a socket. And the sails on them were triangular in shape. They would be called a sprit boomed, in that they had a boom that the forward end of the boom is kind of hiked up a ways, and it's being pushed down and back to control
Right.
the back corner of the sail. And it was a yawl because the aft mast is quite small way at the back.
Right.
So it was a sprit boomed cat yawl.
That sounds right.
And then the 21-foot boat was similar. It was actually a ketch rather than a yawl. The mizzen sail, the aft sail, was still larger than the mainsail, but almost as big. And it also was freestanding, but it had a different way of reefing, which is that you rotate the mast, and with each 360 degree rotation of it, you've reduced the sail area a certain amount.
Right. So we'll come back to the boat, but just for reference, this is a Sea Pearl that you're talking about.
Right.
Sea Pearl 21. So in this episode, we're going to talk about your trip, which I think your title already mentioned. You crossed the Caribbean, and then you went down the coast of Central and part of South America, and then you went inland. Ginny probably already touched on this, but why did you undertake the trip?
First, let me just contrast it to 3 years on the 12-foot boat. 3 years on the 12-foot boat was sort of pre-thought, intentional. The 5-year voyage was not very pre-thought. It became intentional. But the beginning was that we had gone down to the Western Caribbean. That's the Caribbean coast of Mexico and Belize. And we liked it down there, but we felt we needed something more than the canoe that we had. We found that we heard that they had these atolls out there. There's atolls like 20 miles offshore. How do you get to the atoll? We can't get there in our canoe. So we went and we got a boat, a real sailing boat, the one we ended up on, and we modified it. And we went to those atolls and we did all the snorkeling. And then we thought, this is great. There's no reason we have to go home. Let's continue down along the coast of Central America, and eventually reached Panama. And by that time, it was mission creep, and it just became a bigger thing. And we decided to glorify it, expand it by going to the Amazon by means of this backdoor route up the Orinoco and across a certain connector waterway that not too many people know about. Takes you into the Rio Negro. And then we heard about it. Well, we figured it out ourselves. A way to get from another tributary of the Amazon to the Paraguay River, which is a tributary of the Paraná. That puts you down in Argentina. So it grew of its own accord as we realized what we were able to do. We realized that a longer trip was possible through these riverine connections in South America.
This is one of there are many things that make your trip unique. This is one of the most unique aspects of it, is that you crossed the sea first in a small boat, and then you took the same boat and navigated around the enormous river systems of South America, deep inland. Do you know how many miles of inland riverway you covered?
I don't have that on top of my head. I do know that we traveled total 18,000 miles, and I would guess that maybe 8,000 would be in the rivers.
Right. So, and for those who think in kilometers, that would be over 30,000 kilometers total. And 8,000 miles is going to be something like 14 or 15,000 kilometers of inland rivers in South America. Just ballpark figures. So, for the sake of comparison, the 3-year trip, and your boat was named Squeak. I'm guessing because it was small.
Right.
The 3-year trip, which was almost 20 years earlier, right?
Mm-hmm.
Now, what was the route for the 3-year trip with Squeak?
That began from here, Bremerton, Seattle area, with a portage by vehicle. It actually fit inside of my friend's van. We took it to Glacier National Park, Montana, and a stream flowing from that vicinity eastward, flowing into and becoming part of the Missouri River, that's where I put in it by myself. And so starting with just a little creek, just enough water to float my 6-inch draft boat, right?
Right.
Um, and then that was called the Milk River. It's actually in Canada for much of the time. Then it comes back into Montana, flows into the Missouri. The Missouri flows into the Mississippi. So at first it's the rivers. And then when I came out the mouth of the Mississippi, I kind of got a jump start, you might say. I introduced myself to the captain of a tramp freighter, got a job on that freighter, brought my boat with me, and he dropped me off in Colon, Panama. That's the Caribbean side of the Panama Canal. Then I got again under my own power, so I kind of skipped over that in terms of navigating myself and went through the Panama Canal. And then I went, it's actually east at first and then south, but you're going down towards South America, the Pacific coast of Panama and Colombia. And that, although it was a short distance from the Panama Canal to the port of Buenaventura, Colombia, was the most difficult and dangerous part of the trip. It took 6 months to accomplish that. And then from Buenaventura, I got rides on pickup trucks across the Andes to go to the Atlantic watershed, the rivers flowing back towards the Atlantic. And I did the same thing there in South America that I had done in North America. Got to a river system as high up as was conveniently possible with the road getting into it, and where that had enough water in it, and started on a tributary of the Orinoco. So at first it's in Colombia, and then it's in Venezuela. And coming out the mouth of the Orinoco River put me into the final phase of the voyage, which is that I'm now in the Caribbean. And I sailed north through the Antilles, the Lesser and Greater Antilles that terminate in Cuba. And then when I got to Florida, Miami, that trip was done.
Wow. Coincidentally, I was just in the last 24 hours looking at a map of the Mississippi watershed and all the rivers that feed into it. And especially for people who are not from North America, it's important to note that there are 3 main watersheds in the United States. There's everything from the Rocky Mountain Range west, and there's everything from the Appalachian Mountains east, and then the middle 50% of the country or more, and this is essentially all the way across the continent, all drains into the one Mississippi River. And so what you're saying is that you took the boat up to the Canadian border, the U.S. Canadian border, and got in the river right up there and descended the entire Mississippi River watershed as the first thing you did with this boat, which then ended up being not only a river boat but an ocean voyaging boat.
That is correct. It was the northernmost tributary of the Missouri River. The Milk River begins just barely in Montana, within sight of the snow-covered Rocky Mountains. And then within, it was about a half mile, I was in Canada. And I was in whichever province, I guess that's Alberta, for several hundred miles. Then it come back into Montana.
Right. Alberta or Saskatchewan there. Alberta, probably. And then this was all in a boat that you had built yourself.
Mm-hmm. Right.
You were in your mid-30s at the time, right?
Yes, I was 37 years old. It's a rowboat, sailboat, no motor.
Right. So then, as we've already discussed, because Ginny came on at the beginning, the 2 people in this trip were Ginny, and then you were joined by a third near the end of the trip.
Right.
And he's still with you. He's, what, 9 years old now?
Yes, he's 9 years old today. Born in Brazil.
Right. Now, for the more recent trip, what was your choice of boat for this more recent trip?
So for this trip, the idea was a boat like Squeak, only bigger as necessary for 2 people. So a similar level of comfort, a similar level of ability to carry enough stuff for 10 days, say. But since there's two people, it has to be bigger. And you have to be able to carry more stuff. And so that dialed it in pretty well to this Sea Pearl. Sea Pearl is a 21-foot boat, but sort of unusually shallow draft, like 6 or 7 inches, and unusually just small, sort of. It's narrow and kind of like a canoe shape. So it's a good shape, it's a good boat. It's able to go into shallow water. It's light enough we could not pull it up out of the water by ourselves. So that was one level of adaptability that we did not have compared to the first one. But that was the only one. We could still row it, still sail it. We could still transport it, because with a couple extra people, you can pick it up and put it on the back of a pickup truck. So the only thing we lost was the ability to drag it up on the beach by ourselves. Other than that, it was pretty much the same thing. It was a little bit stabler platform than a 12-footer, but it was not a very stable platform. It's very, very, very bouncy in the water.
Right. Now, this was the boat you used as the basis was one of the older Sea Perils, because I know, this one of the things that the Sea Pearl has several unique features, but one of the ones in the last 25 years has been that it uses lee boards instead of a centerboard. But I believe yours was one of the older centerboard versions. Is that correct?
No, it's a lee boarder.
It is a lee boarder.
It was a lee boarder, and it was one of the earliest boats. It was before they had water ballast put into them, which was suitable for us because we added storage tanks and water tanks, and we installed those, affixed them firmly to the floor, the cabin floor, to the bottom of the boat. So we didn't need water ballast because we were carrying drinking water, and we were carrying supplies, tools, etc., that are kind of bolted to the floor. That was our ballast.
Right. Did you epoxy them in, or?
No, it was a matter of having floorboards go across them, and then vertical beams that are held down by attachment to some posts.
Right.
And so it's held down.
Right. So then the Sea Pearl is early on in the Everglades Challenge, which is an earlier episode of mine. In that episode, the person I interviewed uses a Hobie Tandem Islander, or Adventure Island, Tandem Islander TI, which is a kayak-based trimaran. But one of the most popular boats in the sort of 10 to, say, 5 to 20 year range ago, one of the most popular boats in the Everglades Challenge event was the Sea Pearl. And one of the reasons for that is the adaptability you're talking about, and that it rows reasonably well. It's quite seaworthy, and it sails very well. And you also had a motor on it, at least for part of your trip, I believe, right?
Yeah, of the 5 years, the last 3 years, we had a 2-horse Honda.
All right. And I know a fair amount about your trip because you published a series of articles as you were doing the trip in a magazine called Small Craft Advisor, which I subscribe to and have for a long time. And I would guess that some of your book is based on those articles, and so you discuss a lot about the engine and such in that. You had some adventures.
Oh, yes, of course, yeah.
So,
yeah. Just a little bit about that. At first, we didn't need a motor. We didn't need a motor until we got to Honduras, and we still didn't get one. Honduras has a Caribbean coast that runs east and west, and so it's, when you're on land, you're looking north into the Caribbean, and we had to travel east along the coastline straight into the trade winds. That was very difficult. And when we got to Panama, it was the same situation, only much worse, which is that we were going to try to go to Venezuela. That was into the trade winds for close to 2,000 miles. We didn't care to bite that off. And then, of course, so that's when we got the motors in Panama.
Right.
And then when we had the motor and were able to make it to windward in those heavy seas, we realized that it would be really good for going up a river as well. So the river part of the voyage, it would not have been possible. For some Superman, it might have been. But you'd have to, how would you get up those rivers in that boat without a motor? No, it would be simply impossible. With a canoe, it's barely possible, but it would not be possible with the kind of, no, it's pretty much not possible. You need
Yeah,
a motor.
could not have covered that kind of mileage in that.
You couldn't have
that
gone
time frame.
up those rivers. It was right. It would there. It was. I can't say it's totally impossible because it was done by the Starkells, Don and Dana Starkell. They completed a trip, and it's a book. It's called Paddle to the Amazon, and that's how I knew it's possible to go through that backdoor connector into the Amazon. They made it up, and over that divide, but they're like Olympic class canoeists and able to go up a river for 1,500 miles against the current. Sometimes it's whitewater rapids. I don't know how you do that, but they did it.
Right. As you said, they were very powerful paddlers and not normal.
They're
not normal in their abilities.
Not normal people.
Right. They exceeded what most people can do.
Yeah.
So and there again, there's perhaps more of their emphasis as boaters was on that paddling ability. Would you say that the boat you used the name of the boat is Thurston, right?
Right.
So would you say that Thurston was as close as one can get to the ideal boat for that particular mission? Would you think of other boats that might have worked? Something I'm thinking of the Kruger cruisers or the folding kayaks or folding canoes. Certainly the folding kayaks are seaworthy enough, but
well, you have these considerations. There's the saltwater part of the trip and the river part of the trip. They're quite different. When you're on the saltwater part of the trip, your main concern is it has to be a small boat for the river part of the trip. So we know it's going to be a small boat. You have to be able to get out of the water and into, your refuge. It's a matter of refuges. You've got to find refuges that you can get into. They have to be, if they're not close enough together, you're going to have to do an overnight passage coastal wise. It's usually going along the coast. You might be in an island for a while and then come to the mainland again, but largely you're going from coastal harbor to coastal harbor or river mouth, and you're looking for places that have protection from the waves. So these are bays. You want to be on the lee side of something, and so you have to study those things. You have to know what the possibilities are ahead of you, and those possibilities are going to depend on the sea state, because that's going to tell you what the surf is going to be, whether you get into a certain river mouth or not. So at any rate, what in the ocean part of it, saltwater, your boat has to, really small and light is good because that makes it easier to get into land and onto the beach, or into, sometimes you've got a reef and you've got to get through or over the reef, and you might be able to just go right over the top if you have just like a canoe, say. So small is good there. But if you have a boat that's so small you can't sleep aboard, then you're really handicapped. That'd be very, very, very difficult to do the trip we did in just a canoe, because you'll be going along and it's nothing but mangrove swamp jungle for hundreds of miles. How do you pitch a tent in a mangrove swamp jungle? You don't. You have to somehow sleep aboard your canoe as well and have your gear. And well, the Starkells, they show that no, you shouldn't do it. They did it, but they capsized probably 10 times. Their whole boat was turned around and full of water, and they had to figure out how to get back on land through the breakers. They did it, but they shouldn't have survived,
Right.
And so really canoe was not suitable, but something a little bit bigger than a canoe might have been okay. But then when you get into the rivers of South America, the bugs are even worse. They're already bad along the coasts of, say, Central America. But at least you're on the beach and there's a wind blowing. The trade winds are blowing most of them off you. Once you get up into the rivers, the bugs are really bad, and there's no place to camp there on the jungle. Usually there's just thick, heavy vegetation that's hard to even get into with just your body, much less figure out a place to pitch a tent, So you need to be able to sleep on your boat. So boat has to be a little bit bigger, and then, so it has to be that big enough, but it can't be too big because of the route that we took, this multiple watershed thing. We're on the, this river, then that river, then this river, then that river. That means there's portages. There's portages from the headwaters of one river to the headwaters of another river. That's the top of the divide kind of portage, and we had several of those. But then there's portages where the river you're taking has a rapids or a dam, and you have to portage around those. And so you want a boat that is small enough to make those portages. Now, in our case, it worked pretty well. It was big enough to live aboard, but small enough to get transports when needed at a low enough cost. We actually did 13 portages in South America.
Really?
Some of them were just a mile or two, but one of them was 300 or 400 miles. And we negotiated each one on the spot independently, asking around who's got a truck, who's got a trailer, how much will you charge to take us someplace? And we always found something. And with a 21-foot boat, it worked out. But even there, it was bigger than convenient by a long shot, because especially in Brazil, they don't want you to transport anything that hangs over the back of a trailer. And so it was limiting. If you could take a larger boat and dismantle it lengthwise into smaller lengthwise pieces, then you could fit them on a pickup truck. Pickup trucks are always easy. You can always find anybody with a pickup truck. If you can find something that takes apart and stacks the different parts lengthwise, then your portaging problems are over, because you can dismantle the boat and portage easily. But we didn't have that kind of boat. That would be a very specialized boat, obviously, to be able to do that. So our boat was a good compromise. We were able to make those portages, and we're able to afford them.
I'm listening to this. It's taking me to the Everglades Challenge event, where the boats that are used in that fit a lot of the things that you're talking about. The Hobie Tandem Islander would work. It's a trimaran, so you can sleep on the trampolines. And getting a little bigger than that, the 17-foot B&B Core Sound 17 Mark III, which gets you down to 17 feet and has more internal room than Thurston did, and is also a cat catch. And a third cat catch. Cat catches are very popular in that event. Third cat catch is a recent Bedard ROG, or River of Grass, but ROG boat that has nice inside accommodation and just 15 feet and a planing hull. And also designed for rowing as well.
Something I haven't pointed out yet is that both my boats, the 3-year voyage and the 5-year voyage, they both had enclosed cabins.
Yeah.
That's something that you wouldn't imagine a 12-footer would have, but it actually had an enclosed cabin. And you need an enclosed cabin. You need to be able to get out of you need to have a closed cabin for seaworthiness, because capsize will probably happen. And you need to have an enclosed cabin for rain, and you need to have a mosquito control net possibility. You have to have an enclosed cabin to do the kinds of things we did. It would not be possible. Well, the Starkells did it, so it is possible, but they probably got malaria, so I wouldn't recommend it.
Yeah. No, the point is a trip that's doable, and so it's doable with an enclosed cabin, and that's it's a valuable point. So in this trip, I think you said earlier, you didn't have any time constraints, right?
No.
You'd both left your jobs?
We were both savers, so money wasn't a problem, and we had no time constraints whatsoever.
So as a voyage, you passed through many different cultures and several different regions on this trip. A good deal of the area you're talking about is Spanish speaking. Did you get into areas where they speak Portuguese as well?
Yes. Brazil.
Did you have much command of the Spanish language and Portuguese language before you went?
I had a moderate command of Spanish from my 3 years in a 12-foot boat, and during the 5-year voyage, I developed a moderate capability in Portuguese.
How much of a limiting factor do you think that language was one way or another in this trip, and how much preparation would one want to have beforehand?
I personally do not care to travel very much where I don't speak a language. I mean, I did maybe at one time in my life, but I I wouldn't really prefer that. And so I never I spoke Spanish well enough, and before too long I spoke Portuguese well enough that I didn't feel limited, uh, and everything was fine.
And how about Ginny? Did she speak Spanish and Portuguese going in?
No, she didn't have any previous background in either language, and she had to scramble more, and she had to understand less. But she made it as well. We both studied along the way, and particularly Portuguese. We took Rosetta Stone courses along the way of Portuguese.
Uh-huh. In terms of Spanish, you mentioned having to negotiate those portages, which I know you recount those in your written material, but the negotiations were in Spanish, right?
Of course,
Yeah.
or Portuguese.
That right. So that sounds like a pretty complex usage of the language.
Mm. Well, I had no trouble. My language skills were totally adequate. You don't have to be very fluent really to get by.
Mm-hmm. What other cultural or historical factors concerning this trip would you bring up or mention?
Well, I've always really been a history buff, and I am read up on the history of any place I've been probably, and I worked some of that into the books. We're talking about the Western Hemisphere here, where there wasn't much of a history. The Native Americans didn't have a written language, so it mostly starts with the Europeans coming and the explorers and the different collisions of peoples when the Europeans came. So there's white people and black people come in and introduced to where it had been just Native Americans, and then those three races are intermingling and forming new tribes and languages and so forth. There's in North America, you have the voyageurs, the French travelers by river. In South America, you have the equivalent. They were called the Bandaranches, which were the Portuguese, but pretty soon they were intermarrying, so they could be part Portuguese, part black, part Native American. But they were like the voyageurs only of South America. Any continent that's being explored in its early days is being explored by rivers. They're not hacking their way through the jungle. They're taking the rivers, of course. And so they explored that continent by the same routes we took. And that was something that really meant a lot to us. We were going where the Banderanches had gone, and they had opened it up and made the discoveries of the different lands back hundreds of years ago. And now river travel isn't as important anymore, and certainly small boat people aren't going where we went anymore. Not long distances, maybe some local fishermen or something. And so, but we were communing with or in tune with the Banderanches. And then there's the Gauchos, which is another kind of hybrid kind of man who was half breed of something or rather and learning how to adapt to the great plains of South America. And on the Caribbean coast, there's Mosquito Indians, which takes explanation to even say what that means, because they're not necessarily really Indians, although that might be kind of a faux pas to say that. But then there's the mosquitoes. The name slips by me, but they occur from Belize, Guatemala, and a little bit of Honduras, where they're mostly black but speak their own language, and I just can't think of their name right now. They're results of the collisions of cultures. There's really fascinating. There's places where there are colonies of, and they're still living in the bush. And the one word for them is bush people. Another word is maroon. They're maroons. They have their own language. They were escaped slaves, and we ran into some of those people. They have never mixed in and to the melting pot, and the different maroon communities speak different languages from each other.
Huh.
And you're coming through these places, and you're seeing all this stuff, and the especially the Guyanas. At the tail end of the 5-year voyage, I had to depart from my wife and child because I had to be in the ocean to complete the trip. The rivers were suitable for having a baby. The ocean was not. So by myself, I went out the mouth of the Amazon and up the coast of French Guiana, Suriname, and British Guiana. And there's a whole another world of ethnic groups there that was just an eye-opener.
You said that the trip had evolved organically, that you started out with some trips, I think, up along the Caribbean. You wanted to get out to the atolls. But then it sounds like you had read up a good deal on the history of the region you were in before you got there. When did that happen? Um, so that preparation for the continuing the journey.
Well, the big leap was knowing about the connection from the upper Orinoco into the Rio Negro.
Right.
And I had read that book even before 3 Years in a 12-Foot Boat. I had read that book in the 80s. And so I knew that it was possible to go over that divide. And I was aware of Alexander von Humboldt and some of his travels and explorations. And that was the only parts that were really mysterious. Beyond that, we were able to figure out the geographical connections ourselves and then read up on the history while we were at it. When we were in South America, we would go to libraries in order to get some book or some material, or find a cyber cafe and find out some questions we were having. We were able to do some research along the way to have some basic understanding of the history of some of those areas.
You're reminding me of how people have realized that they can cross Europe by water, and you go up the canals from France or in the Netherlands, and then the trick is, as in your case, switching watersheds and getting over the top. And I found a 1930s series of National Geographic articles by someone who figured out, I think it was King Ludwig's Canal was the link right in Germany from the one watershed to the other watershed, and then went down and ended up in the Black Sea. So, and of course, this is also similar to what you did with Squeak, where you portaged up over the continental divide, i.e. the Rocky Mountains, and then went down in a different watershed than the one you lived in to the Gulf of Mexico. So that does suggest a sort of major idea in terms of voyaging to try to link watersheds. And it's very interesting that what you did was you ended up going up all the way up one watershed in South America, and then portaging the boat over and going all the way down the other one, right?
Yeah. We actually went over 3 humps. We went up the Orinoco, down the Negro Amazon. Then we went up the Madeira / Guaporé and down the Paraguay Paraná. I have to say 2 river names because one's a tributary of the other. Then we went up the Uruguay Paraná and some smaller rivers I won't bother to say, and then down the Araguaia Tocantins. So there were 3 big humps we went over.
Right. So you stayed on the boat. You effectively camped on the boat, and I think that the shelter you built on Thurston was about the size of a 2-person tent, if I understood it correctly.
Yeah, it was about as big as our Volvo station wagon inside.
Mm-hmm. How often did you stay elsewhere? I'm sure you didn't have a shower on Thurston, so
Mm.
stay in town in a motel or something. How often did you do something like that?
Oh, we didn't stay in hotels hardly at all. We carried a tent, and sometimes we used it when the situation there would be that we are not able to get the boat to some place where you've got calm water, and um, that's the main thing, I guess. You're able to anchor someplace, but it turns out that you can sleep better if you go on shore. You just wade ashore. You got the boat anchored in shallow water. You wade ashore with a tent, and then you can sleep better. In that case, we didn't do that very much. We mostly slept aboard. I can't think of very many exceptions to that. A few nights in hotels or at somebody else's house.
Mm-hmm. How did you wash up? How did you cook on board always? Did you eat in restaurants much?
Oh yeah, we're just able to do everything aboard. We wash the clothes the old-fashioned way with the tub and a
Right,
brush and soap, and we cook aboard and we bathe aboard. Go to the bathroom with a bucket.
right,
Just you're always with the water, so you're able to pour the water over your head, and
right,
bathe.
right.
It's better in fresh water than salt water. You can't bathe as well with salt water, but yeah, that's another reason why the rivers were nice.
Yeah. Well, how clean was the water in the rivers?
Well, the rivers in South America are very clean in terms of absence of man's pollution. And then some of them are clear naturally. So the Rio Negro being the main one there. It's called the Black River because it's tinted a blackish color, but it's not. If you hold a glass up, it's almost crystal clear, but it's got enough of that tint that in the depth of it looks black. It's clean. The other rivers are very different. They have a lot of sediment, and so they're muddy kind of.
Mm-hmm.
So they're clean in terms of absence of pollution, but they might be muddy-ish.
Are there any,
Microflora.
that's it. Are there any microbes in the water to worry about?
Yeah, yeah. You don't. We never drank straight.
Right,
I never drink straight. I don't care where I am.
right. Schistosomiasis and all this, not a factor there, I don't
Yeah,
think. But
yeah. We handled water mostly by municipal water sources. We would, you're in whatever port town in Central or South America probably has good municipal water. Now there are exceptions to that too,
right.
but we usually were able to do that. That was
Huh.
maybe 2/3 of the time, and about 1/3 of the time, we you buy bottled water. The 5-gallon carboy,
Right,
or just 1-gallon jugs, and fill up our tanks with that. We
right.
had to do that quite a bit also.
Okay. Did you chemically treat water at all?
We almost never did. No, I don't think we ever chemically treated, but we did sometimes when we only a few times filter with a
Right,
pump driven water filter.
right,
We carried that when nothing else was available.
right. What sorts of knowledge, skills, abilities would you recommend that other people would need to undertake this adventure, and how does one acquire those abilities?
I would answer this in part by expanding on what we were just talking about. We were talking about how to keep your health by not drinking the water straight from wherever you are. That's pretty straightforward, I suppose. You have to make sure about that. You can't make exceptions. Oh, I'll just drink the water this once. No, you have to be like disciplined. You have to never drink the water straight, period, And then another one is the mosquitoes. You should never let them bite you. Never, not even once. Here you may be physically impossible to never get bitten by a mosquito, but you have to really be on top of it, and you have to build your life around the fact that you don't want to get bit by the mosquitoes,
Hmm.
or the other bugs. There's no-see-ums, and there's different regions that have these other bugs, whatever they are, flying insects. And so you have to have the right nets, one for mosquitoes, one for no-see-ums. You have to be wearing clothing most of the time. You have to have insect repellent, although we actually didn't need it very much. And you have to have a mosquito coil to chase the mosquitoes out from a place where you're going to go into it. So just to go back to how you actually asked the question about your skills and abilities and stuff, I'd say it's more just being disciplined and going all out. You try to really maintain your health. You try to be safe, wherever you are and whatever you're doing. That's job number one, right?
Mm-hmm. Now, you talked about when you were younger, and was it early 70s or was it later than that? But after college, you went traveling around the world, essentially.
You're right. 71, 72.
Okay. So in that time period, is that when you would say that you learned how to deal with bad water and that sort of thing?
Oh, yeah, more or less, I suppose.
It is a particular body of knowledge, so I do want to find a way to tell people that where they would learn it. People are
Well,
challenged. Yeah,
I would jump in with this. People are generally misinformed about what the actual dangers are. They always want to talk about the snakes. That's not what you have to worry about. They want to talk about the crocodiles. You don't really have to worry about the crocodiles. They want to talk about the piranha. You don't have to worry about the piranhas. You have to worry about the microbes and the diseases. You really have to worry about that.
that's exactly where I was
And it's
going.
really not rocket science.
Yeah.
Those things aren't rocket science, really. That can be figured out. But there's half a dozen different major diseases carried by the different flying insects. It's not just malaria. There's all these other ones
Right.
too, dengue and
Zika. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yes. And of course, in North America, there are ticks, but and all these things all of those issues can be learned by researching and just putting into effect what you learn.
Yeah, like for example, on the boat, in both the boats I made the hatchway into the cabin with a kind of a lip around it, so that you can like put a big rubber band around the whole thing, so that you can quickly, securely put an elastic banded net over it, quickly, because the bugs are getting in.
Right.
You get inside, and then from inside you reach up and you put it on, and it has to quickly be able to go on and stay on, because you don't want the bugs to come in.
And in terms of working on the boat and such, this was self-taught, right?
Self-taught, yeah. I'm self-taught in many respects. I went to college, but I didn't go to college on how to work on boats.
Right. So I think that's a good, strong steer from you in terms of safety and health concerns away from larger critters and towards unseen threats like
Exactly.
protozoa and the germs in flying insects.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, if you can keep those bugs out of your blood system, there's not that many things to worry about down there.
That's most of
It's
right.
exaggerated.
Yeah.
Some of the dangers are exaggerated.
How about human beings?
That's always a wild card. And we went to dangerous places. And so you're running risks there, and we just had some good luck. You can't eliminate all those hazards. They exist. We were, well, I've been robbed at knife point or hit over the head, I think 5 times in my life. And that's because I go dangerous places, And it happened once with Jenny. And she was mildly wounded. She fought back. At any rate, that's something that I wouldn't necessarily recommend to people to go to some of those places where we went. But yeah, they were kind of dangerous. But they were on the way. You almost couldn't skip them and do the trip we did. There were ports you have to go to reprovision and then get out as quick as you can. Dangerous places.
And you don't sound like you have any particular advice as to ways of mitigating the risk of those encounters.
There's no, that's a very personal thing. Maybe I should have studied martial arts, and I never have. So that's up to the individual to figure that out. I'm no expert on that.
Right.
Except just it's just common sense on how to deal with people and keeping your eyes open,
Right.
Running sometimes. If you're in, there've been quite a few times when I've been in certain places and I don't walk, I run, because if there's people mugging and so forth, they aren't expecting somebody to run through the neighborhood. They don't have time to set up on you.
Right. Shifting to affording the trip in terms of time and money, and I think that you've touched on these a bit. You both are savers, and you both left your jobs to do this.
Right.
And that's your broad overview. What did the trip cost? What were the biggest costs in the trip? What sorts of costs does one have to think about in preparing for a trip like this? And how did the realities play out against your expectations and your plans?
It was all quite affordable. I think we averaged about $1,500 a month, including everything, including any recreational expenses as well as boat repair and so forth.
Uh-huh.
The costs were never too great at all.
Right.
We flew back home twice. That's part of the expense. And we managed that as well.
But it averaged out to about $1,500 per month for both of you.
About something like that. Yeah.
What sorts of variables might there have been in that one could control for, or what would one want to watch out for in terms of not having costs get out of control?
Well, obviously, you can spend a lot of money if you want to, if you can, but most expenses seems like they're of a discretionary nature. If you want to buy a new fancy cell phone with each new country you get into, but we would always just figure out cheaper ways to do things. Coming to mention of it, phones, the different countries of Latin America tend to have each one its own different phone system and different all the rules that one gets used to living in a certain country. Then you have to go to another country and you have to figure that out. So it's just figuring it out. Whatever it is, it's figuring it out of the new place. You come into a new town, a new port. You've got about 10 things you have to figure out. You have to figure out where this is and where that is, and you have to figure out how safe it is, and you have to figure out where you can put your boat. And you're going to want a map first thing, but you're going to want some water first thing, and you're going to want this. But what usually happens is that you're multitasking. You're finding a place. You're asking around. You get a place to put your boat. You start walking in, and then you realize, oh, I need to go back to the boat and bring the garbage with me because we got to drop off the garbage someplace. And then you meet somebody, and then it gets easier and easier because they're interested in you, and they give you a ride because they want to spend time with you. You're popular. The boring humdrum day to day of their lives has been livened up a little bit because these strangers are in town doing something interesting. Can I take you around? They'll spend the whole day with you. If you want them to. So that's when things get really easy.
And you said you're both savers. I know right now a big thing in the United States, especially in the shadow of the pandemic, is that people are talking about a so-called movement of going for financial independence or financial freedom and trying to retire early. And what you did predates that, so you wouldn't have used those terms. But how would you say that you relate to that? What sort of framework do you think that you would describe yourselves as having used in terms of getting yourselves financially ready to take off for 5 years and do something like this?
I'm kind of conventional or old school, I guess, in that my my career has been kind of a conventional one, and I'm not able to work on the side. I never have done that much. I simply have my profession and saved from it, and of course it is possible to make a living online in so many different ways that you could. To some extent, I do have a business which is writing and selling books, but that's like tiny compared to the overall earnings I've made in my life. Being a being a self-published author is not any big, cash reward or anything, for 99% of us. So I take my hat off to the people who figure out how to do what you're saying, to be self-supporting. But my career was not that. If I was a welder, I could have gotten jobs welding here and there. If I was a dentist, I could have found work by fixing people's teeth. I didn't have any of those skills. I was a city planner. You can't make any money doing that unless you are plunked down someplace for a few years with a city planning job. So you're probably better at that than I am, or know people who are than
Well,
I do.
but I mean, what you're describing is the reality that most people face, and then how to work adventure into that in one's life. And so you
Mhm.
took, I mean, two of the junctures that we're talking about, in a sense, this most recent trip was at the end of the career that you had done. And then the first trip that you did was at a juncture that many people try to take advantage of right when you graduate from college. But then that middle trip with Squeak, the 3-year trip, was right in the middle of most people's career time. And so what
Mhm.
was the progression there, and how did you work that in? Did you now I think I
Okay.
would guess that you got a master's degree in public administration or urban planning or something at some point. Was that before or after the 3-year trip?
Okay. First, a correction. My first year of travel was right out of high school.
Okay, sorry.
Um,
Yes.
then college,
Right.
and then a career, and then a master's degree during the midst of my career. And my voyage from 1990 to 1993 was a sabbatical, you could call it, in the middle of my career. So the nature of my career was not one steady job the whole time. I had probably 10 different jobs during the course of my professional career, and this was obviously a gap between two of those professional jobs.
Okay. So
And I just had sufficient savings. That voyage, the I kept track of it. 3 years during that time frame, with the money as a dollar was worth then, cost $12,000
right,
for 3 years.
right.
So I had $12,000.
Yeah,
So
right. So you did some adventuring, went to college, continued on into the career, and then did the master's at some point during that time before the 3-year trip,
mhm.
and then simply between jobs. At one point, you left one job, did your 3-year journey, came back, got another job, and continued on.
Right, exactly. And then the 5 year voyage was was towards the end of my career. I didn't mean for it to be a permanent retirement. My thinking, especially since, as I've explained, I was thinking in terms of a shorter trip going
Right.
down to those atolls.
Mm-hmm.
I thought I was going to come back and have a final job that would be lasting, say, 5 years before I retired.
Right.
But then the trip ended up being such a big trip that by the time I got back, it ended up that I was retired, and I just didn't know it yet.
Well, it sounds like a major part of this is keeping the trips affordable.
Yes.
And you were saying earlier about keeping the boat comfortable enough that you can actually make an extended trip in it and not have to
Mhm.
terminate because it was just too uncomfortable.
It's worth explaining because it comes down to cost and as well as other things that these boats are very simple. They have almost no electrical system. There's very little that you have to replace and maintain. Larger boats are expensive to maintain, but a small kind of handmade little boat like what we're talking about, they're not expensive to maintain.
Right.
You have to buy a little bit of epoxy. You have to do this and that, but you don't have engines breaking. Well, we had our 2-horse Honda break a couple times, but we figured out how to fix it ourselves.
Right. How would you describe your process for learning about new routes or discovering new places to go, new things to do?
Well, this is something that we haven't talked about. It's, I think, pretty interesting. When you do the kind of trips that what we're talking about, you have to do a different kind of planning. There is no ready source of information in existence. You have to come with it yourself. When you're on the saltwater part of the trip, you the usual source of information is the sailing guide, like the sailing guide to the Bahamas, the sailing guide to the Mexico and stuff like. You don't really need that because the things that those books are written for a larger boat with a deeper draft. So that's mostly concerned with how to come in without hitting rocks. So you don't have to worry about that because your boat is so shallow draft that if there is a rock there, you will see the rock, right?
Right.
And but what those books don't have, and you wish that did have, is where you can land someplace other than a port. Where there's a sheltered beach or something, so you can make the more frequent stops and find refuges. Since those books don't have that, you have to research that on your own. And we did that with Google Earth. See, down in Latin America, there's cyber cafes. We don't have the internet on the boat, obviously.
Right.
And our cell phone usually has not got any coverage. If we have a cell phone at any one point in time, we probably don't have any coverage when we're on our boat. So when you are someplace that is a port and you're, of course, going to get some water and some food and everything there too, but you go to the cyber cafe, you check your email, but you do the research with Google Earth, staring, zooming way in and panning and zooming and panning all these coastlines and all these rivers, and you're identifying them with an Excel spreadsheet on the side so that you're identifying where they are and what orientation they are to the prevailing winds and various variables. We probably had, for each possible place, we had 10 different variables we're identifying. You had to be pretty scientific about it because it's really important. You are able to find that refuge. And then when we got down into South America, on the rivers, those rivers are mapped in the sense that if you get a map of Colombia or a map of Venezuela, it'll show that river, but they're not mapped in the sense of navigational charts. There are no navigational charts. When you're on those rivers, you have to have some idea of which way to go when there's a island in the middle, or you may not know if it is an island because if there's a river coming in, you might go off up a tributary or something. You have to know where the islands are, where there's a likelihood to be sandbars, which way to go around the sandbar. You have to know where there are towns so that you can reprovision. You have to know where there's a town at least every week or two so you can reprovision there. And so this kind of mapping we did also by Google Earth. And this was made possible largely by Jenny, who's really good at computer stuff. We used Google Earth, but we applied artwork to it, which is just clicking and creating vector lines. We're clicking the shorelines, we're clicking the river banks, we're clicking the lakes, and we're clicking where there is a town. And then that artwork is made into a file that is read by our GPS. And our GPS is just a handheld, like used for hiking, but we have a way of mounting it on the mizzen mast in front of us so we see it. And our map is just a little 2-inch by 4-inch screen
Right.
that shows you with the cursor where you are, and it shows you which way you've made some predetermination as to how to go left or right around all the islands and everything. So we actually created our own charts for the last half of the trip, more or less,
Right.
by this means. And it's pretty complicated sometimes because, I mean, a river isn't necessarily just a river. There are places where the rivers down there are divided up into many different channels. There can be as many as, if you take a cross section of, say, the Rio Negro, you'll count 10 islands there. Which channel do you take? And you have to be thorough, because you can't just say, well, I'm just going to go this way, so I'm only going to map that. You have to map everything, because you don't know which way you're going to end up. So we spent a lot of time. We spent hundreds of hours making these charts for the South American part of the trip.
And were those hundreds of hours during the trip or before the trip?
During.
Uh-huh. So you would stop in.
Or might have exaggerated. I say hundreds. Maybe it was a total of 100 or 200.
Well, okay, but I mean, you
hours. But for each major trip or each major city, we would often spend 20 or 40 hours doing the upcoming part. 20 or 40 hours of time on the computer to get ready for the next stage.
And a lot of that would be in an internet cafe.
Internet cafe, right?
Right.
And then when I got used to that, the last part of the trip was back in saltwater. I continued doing that because I could have used conventional navigational charts in the Guyanas and the Caribbean, but I had gotten used to doing that, making my own charts, and found that it's a very good way to go, even when you don't have to.
This is an enormously valuable point you just made. And it's similar to Christine Twermer's interview, where she was talking about how she finds routes. And this is a woman who has long distance hiked. She's got one of the highest mileages in the world. She's done well over 35,000 miles of long distance hiking at this point, and hikes full time. And there aren't charts available for everywhere she goes. And in terms of finding new places to go, she does the land version of what you're talking about quite often, of finding stuff and creating her own route, or following routes that are sort of in the wild electronically and not published as a dedicated route. My standard question here is, of the voyages that you have completed, which is your favorite? And I can't imagine you being able to say that one of them was your favorite per se. How would you compare them? You took them at very different points in your life. And so how did that experience change?
Well, 3 years in a 12-foot boat, being that I was by myself, was much lonelier. And the book is more of it's more novelesque. It includes my own mental machinations and social interactions to a much greater extent than the second book, because in the second book, I'm with Jenny, and she and I were very compatible. There's no drama occurring with her, between her and me. There's really no conflict, and a story needs conflict, right? Well, there was no conflict between Jenny and I. And so the second book has a different feeling to it. It's safe and sane in a way, it's more emotionally steady and positive.
Right.
Whereas the first book has all the swirling, turbulent emotions.
That's interesting. So I understand you have another boat under construction now. Is that correct?
That's right.
And what is this one meant for, and how does it differ from Thurston and Squeak?
Well, I should start off by saying that though I am building this boat, I don't have any plan for it, nor do I really make any projection as to what will happen with it. But it's a result of the fact that, well, my whole history with boats, but most recently and most extensively that with Jenny on the 21-foot Sea Pro, you spend all that time on a boat, and you find yourself wishing this and wishing that, and you're a product of your past experiences. And so what I wanted in my next boat, and which is about half built now, is more stability in either the 12-foot boat or the 21-foot boat. When you're aboard it, it's very bouncy, even just almost ripples on the water. It makes it hard to sleep. They rock like you wouldn't believe. And that's the biggest thing, is simply passing the night on a boat like that is hard to sleep. You can never get used to the motion, and sometimes it's very extreme. And so a multi-hull is what I'm building now. With a multi-hull, your stability is created not by the flatness of the bottom nor by the ballast, but by the fact that you have a whole nother hull way off to the side, and that's just a totally different ball of wax. To have the three kinds of multi-hulls, of course, are trimarans and catamarans, which is two hulls. But I'm building a proa, which is also two hulls, but one of the hulls is bigger and the other is smaller. And so it's going to be much more comfortable. And then it has a lot more stability than any mono hull. And it's going to be faster because the hulls are so long and skinny.
Are you building the one by Chesapeake Lightcraft, or are you doing something on your own?
No, I'm not building theirs. I ended up with a proa that was an invention of a guy who designed it for and tried to enter it into the first race to Alaska. Are you familiar with the race to Alaska?
Yeah, I'm very familiar with it. Are you talking about Russell Brown, or is it someone else?
Somebody else.
Okay.
He's a guy who he actually works for Chesapeake Lightcraft, the last I heard. But when he designed and built this boat, he did not yet work for them. He's a boat designer.
Actually, I think I've met him. What's his name?
Dylan Majoros.
Yes, I've met him.
You know him?
I went sailing with him. Yeah.
Wow. That's interesting.
Yeah.
How did you meet him?
Chesapeake Lightcraft has an event every spring, every May, I think, on the beach in the Chesapeake, and they put most of their boats on the beach, and you can register and go and sail the boats. And as an employee, he was one of the people on the beach. So I went sailing with him, and we had a wonderful conversation. And he was talking about his background and how he had built this proa. So fascinating, very personable, and very knowledgeable guy, and a good sailor.
Yeah, I ended up with his proa. He named it Palindrome.
Yes.
But I'm changing it so much that I'm going to put another name on it. It's going to be very, very different from the way he had it.
Right. So do you have the actual boat or a different
Yeah,
one?
I've got it right here at the house.
It's the one that he had.
It's the one that he had, but I tore off a good part of it.
That closes a loop.
Yeah, I'm the person that bought it. Mm-hmm.
That closes a loop. I was wondering who had bought it, so now I know.
Well, I ended up with it. I ended up buying it. It was a friend of mine who always spends his time on Craigslist, etc.
Yeah.
And he and I don't too much, but he said, "Steve, I've found something for you." And in this one case, he really had found something for me.
Yep.
Because it was really not a very completed boat, but I didn't need it for it to be completed because I had my own special ideas anyway. And the parts that I can use were just perfect. And the parts that I can't use at all. I'm just throwing them away. But the parts that I can use from what Dylan Majoros designed are just perfect. And I'm glad not to have had to figure that part of it out.
Are you familiar with the name of Russell Brown?
Of course, okay. I know him.
Yeah, because he's not far from where you are.
Yeah.
So,
yeah.
No, they say, and I haven't tried a Pacific Proa, but I understand from everything that's written that it's actually got perhaps the most pleasant sea kindly motion, and my interests have gone in the same direction. So that's very interesting to hear that that's where you're headed.
Well, the biggest change I'm making is that I'm changing it from a Pacific Proa to a tacking proa.
Really?
Yeah.
Huh.
There are three kinds of proas: Pacific, Atlantic, and tacking. And
Right.
I'm changing it to a tacking proa.
Yep. Chesapeake Lightcraft, I think it was that same year, they were selling a tacking proa. It was a 15-footer, and I was fascinated by it because I went out on it and they were loading it up with people and sending it out into the bay on a pretty rough day, and it performed amazingly well. And I don't think that they're actually selling the kit anymore, and I'm not sure why. But it was a very impressive craft, and certainly people don't think of tacking proas perhaps as often as they should as an alternative to a catamaran or a trimaran. And of course, they're much simpler to build because they only have the two hulls, and they don't have two equally sized hulls, and the mast is on only one of the hulls and not in between them. So that's one of the major structural challenges with a catamaran, and what you're doing doesn't have that problem. So you're saying you don't have ideas as to where you would take it,
Well, I have a dream trip that I don't think will be possible, but it's what I think about, and I'd be happy to share it with
Please
you if
do.
you like. Okay. It's to take this boat. I already have a trailer for it. Take it to Duluth, and that's the closest part of the Great Lakes, and go all the way through the Great Lakes from west to east, which will be with the wind. And I'll come out the St. Lawrence Seaway,
of course.
and then I will sail to the Azores.
Oh, okay. Yep.
And that they speak Portuguese there. All
Yep.
right. I speak Portuguese. And then I will go to Europe, and I will circumnavigate Europe clockwise, going through some of the canals you were talking about earlier that will end up in, I believe, the Black Sea.
Down the Danube.
So that'd be part of it will be on the Danube and come down on the Black Sea, then come back out through the Med, and then turn left and go down the coast of Africa and start across the Atlantic somewhere around Senegal or West Africa someplace. And I'll sail down to the Horn of Brazil. So that's where Brazil sticks out easterly into the Atlantic Ocean. And then I'll do some cruising on the coast of Brazil, because Brazil has some beautiful coastlines down in the region of Rio de Janeiro and Sao Paulo. That area has a great coastline. The other parts of Brazil don't really. And then from there, I'll sail back home using the route that I have done before now. But it'll include a stretch that I have not done before, which is the Turks and Caicos in the Bahamas.
Right. Suez Canal, not aiming for that.
No.
Panama Canal?
I wouldn't need to do that. No, I would think I would conclude, if I really did that trip, I think I would conclude that trip in Texas, because Texas is the closest place to state of Washington, and I could trailer it home from there.
I wish you the best of luck making that trip happen.
Don't hold your breath.
But I will read if it does. What are your favorite podcasts, blogs, magazines? What sorts of information sources do you favor in terms of getting your information?
I really only have one thing to mention, and that's the Small Craft Advisor magazine. I read books, but I don't listen to podcasts very much.
Right. Well, as I mentioned, I do subscribe to that magazine also. My normal question is, what is the best way for listeners to find out more about your adventures? And that obviously would be your books. So please let's talk about your books for a moment and tell us about them and tell us where to find them, where to buy them.
3 Years in a 12-Foot Boat is out in a new edition now. I rewrote it substantially, and well, its release date and the new book are both being released April 5th, but I think in reality you can already get them from Amazon or any other outlet. It's it's part of the distribution channels. You should be able to find it however you look. Amazon's the most obvious place. And but then the new book, The 5-Year Voyage, is coming out too, and that's April 5th. But like I say, I think they're already delivering. They're not supposed to be yet, but I think they are. And both books exist in both paperback and ebook.
So titles are 3 Years in a 12-Foot Boat. Is there a subtitle on that?
No, that's it.
And then the title of the new book is?
And it's a bigger book. Okay. It's like 430 pages. It's a heftier book. And then another way it's different is that there are almost no photographs. It was not utilizing the photographic arts. It was using the written word and as literature. And it even includes, I hate to say it, poetry, but it does. And the new book is different in that it has a fair amount of photography because Jenny was a pretty good photographer. It has no poetry. The poetry readers may not want the new book.
And give us the full title on the new book.
The 5-Year Voyage, Exploring Latin American Coasts and Rivers.
All right. Stephen Ladd, thank you very much for joining us today. Fascinating interview. Lots of valuable things there on many levels for people who are looking to emulate your example or just to enjoy escaping from their routine in their mind as they read. And I wish you the best of luck with the book and the best of luck with Palindrome and with the next trip. And of course, the current adventure, which is being a father.
There's people that can also look at my website, because on my website, as you have already noticed, it has writings there that some of them are published in magazines and some of them are not published at all. And you noticed some of those. So people can do that too if they like. Just search for my name and you'll find it.
Great. Actually, I've searched for your name and there are several Stephen Ladds. So yours is Stephen with a PH hyphen Ladd.
Right. Stephen with a PH hyphen Ladd.
That's it. That will
and
get
then
it.
You get it.
Yep.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you for listening to the Trails Around the World podcast. Please visit us online at trailsaroundtheworld.com and please join our Facebook group under the same name. If you liked this podcast, please help us out by leaving a review on your favorite podcast source. This is Sky King, and I look forward to you joining us next time. In the meantime, happy trails to you, and please remember to leave no trace as you enjoy the outdoors.